Hey Pooja, welcome to day 1000. How are you?
And thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm very well. Thank you.
Very happy that you could carve out some time in your busy schedule. We met and I could see the amount of good chaos and good growth happening all around, Limelight. So you've built a big brand in a very new category in India. It's reached a huge pan India reach now, and I think generates a lot of revenue as well. And while we'll tap into all of it, right, I'd love for you to, just give us a quick background first on you and your company, please.
So actually, for me at Limelight, I mean, I came from a very different industry. I never belonged to the diamond and the jewelry background, but managed to meet the largest producer of lab grown diamonds in the world, Mr. Bakul Limbasia. He's based out of Surat. Happened to be my father's very close friend, and that's how I got introduced to this product. And I was in London, graduated from London School of Economics, and like a typical LSE graduate, went on to doing investment banking. So was an investment. So I think मतलब गुजराती हूँ by blood, तो थोड़ा तो वो धंधे वाला कीड़ा मुझ में था ही. एंड बट आई वाज वेरी सर्टेन एंड श्योर कि मुझे इंडिया में आके ही कुछ करना है, फॉर फ्रॉम एन entrepreneurial perspective. Enough, I'm going back home, and I'll see what I have to, what India has in store for me. And that's when I actually happened to meet Mr. Bakul Limbasia and saw this entire setup that they have. They produce north of 7 million carats of diamonds each year, control 35% of India's production. And I was totally amazed to see the kind of tech development, the entire, setup of lab grown diamonds that was happening in India. And then realized that India is championing this space, and US as a market, it's completely opened up. It's embracing lab grown diamonds. All new customers are looking out for lab grown diamonds. So I said, one second, why is this customer only coming from the West, and why aren't we looking inward? And that's when I realized that consumer preferences in general for jewelry have changed. Consumers are not looking at jewelry from a store of value perspective. Locker के लिए jewelry नहीं चाहिए. That was the basic understanding that I got. And I said, that's exactly how we think here. So I decided to pursue this. That was like, the tab में है तो ये तो सिर्फ सस्ता है, quality में compromise हो. It's not the case. It's against all the marketing efforts that the companies have taken in the past for mine diamonds. Technology has come here to give you the same carbon होता है नीचे से anything that carbon comes from below the earth is no different from the carbon that gets grown in these labs. So product is exactly the same, but I think it's coming at you at a much more realistic price point, and at the same time, it's coming at the best quality that you could have ever had. So that gave me a lot of sort of pride in saying that, hey, this is coming out of my country, and I think our world should wear it. But of course, Indians should also be proud and should take pride in wearing lab grown. So I said I'm building a brand for India and from India to the world. So that's how the journey of Limelight began.
Lovely. What a fantastic story. I think, it's always very hard to get out of a comfort zone and pick a category which, you feel is growing, and you have some, gut feeling towards it, but it's very hard to immerse yourself into a completely new category, right? So a lot of players today you see maybe have some background, maybe a lot of them have been in the jewelry business and they end up starting something here, but in your case, as you very well mentioned, it was completely new. So I'm very curious about getting your first customer, right? I think building a brand takes time, and building that brand preference, that brand image is just a function of time. Actually, take us back to probably 2019 when you were just starting out. When is it that how is it that you actually ended up getting your first customers?
So sure. Actually, it's a very interesting question, especially for us, because I still remember those days when we had double challenge. I mean, we had a twofold challenge, right? One was, of course, we were very clear we wanted to build a brand and speak in a brand language to the consumers. But before that, our biggest challenge was that nobody knew of lab grown diamonds in our country, and there was so much of such a big barrier in the minds of the consumer. There was so much hesitation. So our first challenge was to bring in a customer and sort of give them the true facts and figures about lab grown diamonds and do more of an education of the category. So I still remember this was just a little, I mean, of course, 2019, 2020, we weren't operational as much because of COVID and COVID restrictions. Remember us doing a lot of awareness campaigns online. So a lot of our efforts went behind, building the category, establishing the true facts about the category. We went ahead and, sort of wrote about this category in the press. So today, all the technical information that you hear in terms of this is what a lab grown diamond is, this is how CVD diamonds are grown, this is how HPHD diamonds are grown within lab grown. A lot of that effort was something that we had taken in 2019, and then everybody sort of picked up on it and sort of started taking it forward. So that is something that we spent a real good time in the first 2 years on. But I remember before we went on and said ki we'll open our first store, we had a very small sort of a boutique in our office itself where we invited customers and we used to show them. And I think one thing that I realized even at that point in time, and what we continue to build through the brand journey, is that consumers believe a lot in transparency. The minute they understand that this brand is extremely transparent, is willing to share the right facts, figures, and understanding of the product with you, there's an immediate sort of connection that the and trust building and credibility that consumers build to the brand. And I realized that because not out of anything else, but we never showed the product until we sat them down and gave them a 5-minute presentation on what lab grown diamonds are, and that was only out of our own sort of conviction, saying that don't buy from us, we are okay. But first learn the facts and figures, because you have come with so much preconceived notions that first take the knowledge back home. After that, if you buy, you don't buy, that's a separate story altogether. So we used to host, friends and families and, India dear customers, because we were obviously not known at that point in time. But we genuinely spent the first 5 minutes in showing. We made a presentation, we made a video that explained the entire growing process, and then we showcased the product. And that had a very different impact on the consumers, and sales trickled in, and we took that to the sales, to the stores as well. So every store, first, even if you go today, there's a whole lot of education that the staff is equipped with to give you all the right information. Then you decide whether you wish to buy or not. So it was very interesting but very challenging, for us to break the notions, and then to build the category, open up the category, and then build the brand on top of it.
Lovely. I think what I'm extracting from this is that you really focused on customer education, even if that meant that you lost the sale. The idea was us to be transparent, get people here, even if they're friends and family, and just show them more and more that what this category actually means and how real your solution is. My
Absolutely.
follow up there, Pooja, is that you said you are not in the domain at all, right? So if you wanted to kind of take that authority, ki, hey, I know this space so well, how did you upskill yourself so much? Did you upskill yourself? Did you delegate it to an expert? Did you hire a team? How did you actually go about creating customer education in a field where even you were educating yourself first?
Yeah, no, actually, I did. I spent a lot of time understanding diamonds, the depth of diamonds. We had a consultant also on board who's an ex director of DTC De Beers, Mr. Prasad Kapre. He's been a consultant and a guide to me since the start of the Limelight's journey. But I did. I mean, it is impossible to have conviction if you don't know, and especially when you're trying to build a category itself and educate on a category. It's impossible to do that without having the right kind of information on the category itself, right? So had to understand diamonds, but I also went into a lot of look. I mean, I think being part of the female fraternity definitely helps. I think we just love diamonds. So, out of curiosity, also, it was great for me. I mean, I never got bored of it. I loved understanding diamonds and how this whole industry has, sort of come up all these years. But yes, there were technicalities which you have to understand how the color clarities are. Sort of graded. I also have two of my childhood friends who are my co founders. They were part of this industry, so they came with the right kind of expertise. But strongly believe that I couldn't depend on everybody, taking this baton for me. I had to take it myself, which meant I had to educate myself. So I did do a lot of that. And yeah, I think I was an investment banker. So I think it was in our DNA to sort of getting into details was something that I was already so well trained in that it didn't feel like I was doing something very, very different or challenging. And given it was diamonds, it was just a little easier for me.
No, thank you for being honest. I think you have to become an expert. You have to become an expert if you really have to kind of, base your brand on, as you said, transparency coming from, I think, education about a category. I want to now jump into the next part, which is founders always have this temptation to grow fast, right? Be it because of their own vision or ambition, maybe because of external VCs wanting you to grow fast or whatnot, maybe competition, market share. And you end up investing into things too fast, too quickly. So, could you tell us, in your first 3 years, were there any spends you did which you wish you avoided?
In today's day and age, everybody speaks about how digital formats of marketing is perhaps the only and the most important format of marketing, right? I actually feel that that's not entirely true. It of course depends on which category and which field or sector of brand that you're building. Whether you are e-commerce or you're an omni-channel player or you're an offline format, I think that plays a very strong role in deciding what mediums of marketing should you deploy. But I think this digital takes it all, sort of format. I think that was my perhaps a regret from my end, because for us going forward, what we felt is digital helps you in a lot of different targeted, sort of marketing tactics or strategies. But when it comes to the larger, brand building gamut, I think there are far more other mediums that must be utilized, that must be explored to make sure that the brand is establishing whilst you're sort of also doing your target marketing at, the top of the funnel to the, lower end of the funnel. You kind of have to have far more other strategies at the top of the funnel for the brand awareness versus just being focused on digital. Like for example, when we brought on board the celebrity, and at that point in time, we did a lot of offline campaigns. Also, we had OOH, we had a lot of ATL activities that we did, and that had a very big impact on the brand presence across the country. And that's when I realized that you cannot skew either ways. You cannot have a lot of ATL either. You cannot have a lot of digital. A fair balance, a fair mix for your company is something, or your brand is something that you should try and identify.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I believe that for your product, especially, which is so much more, I guess, experiential, it's very important for somebody to kind of see it, feel it, touch it, to kind of make a purchase. And while they may be doing it through Meta, I think you can't really put all your eggs in that basket, right?
Absolutely.
Now, let's say I learned from this. What is the other alternative in your opinion? If it is not Meta and I'm in my first 3 months, right? What can I genuinely do then to, maybe get a customer?
I think the first and foremost important factor is store experience. I think enabling and innovation around the store experience really helps build the brand. And when you're an offline format, your word of mouth is very strong. So the ability for consumers to walk back and say whether I purchased or not, but I had a good time over there. I loved the staff. I loved the relationship that I was building with them, because when consumers come to purchase jewelry, they spend a lot of time in the store. So I think marketing has really gone over and beyond just the basics of these are my brand collaterals. Like this is what I'm going to push everywhere, this is my offer. Like in our industry also, what happens is a lot of times offers is the best, but I don't feel today's consumer is all about that. It's also about how you make them feel, right? I mean, influencers, for example, um, are not the everything has to have its own balance. If influencers is done independently and Meta is not worked upon, or Meta and influencers is done but nothing has been done on OH, then it doesn't give a 360-degree feel. And if it doesn't give a 360-degree feel, then the recall of the brand sort of washes out, because today you're consuming so much content, you're having so many brands to look at. So for your ability to capture attention of the customer is extremely it's getting more and more tougher. And if you're going to do just the basics, then it becomes even more tougher because those basics are no longer, I mean, everybody else is doing that. So, how are you building, innovative factors around the consumer's journey and experience is something that I think we have learned. And I wish to, sort of keep improving on that over time.
Lovely. I feel that a balance, as you said, is so important. And generally, as a company, you should try your best to intentionally spread yourself thin in the start. So you're able to really understand after, some months or years what actually is working. I usually ask, underrated and overrated channels. And I think you, any which ways, highlighted quite a few of that already. But if I had to ask, right, for a fellow founder, let's say building in your category, if I have limited budgets, no brand, what is according to you the most underrated channel for me to get more customers?
I think the most underrated channel is, in my opinion, the WhatsApp channel. By that, I mean, typically what's happening is a lot of discovery happens online, and then a lot of consumers want to speak to you to gain that trust. Right. And therefore, there's always this aspect of, taking those online, consumers or online conversations to a WhatsApp. The ability to convert that into sale is perhaps the most interesting angle that someone can take when they're building out, when they're very, they're young, they're limited budgets. It's a very inexpensive way to drive sales. And in that WhatsApp, ability to have video calling with the customers, where you can actually show them how the jewelry looks, and you can perhaps have a female based salesperson that can actually wear it and show also the context of how that particular jewelry looks, giving a visual representation of that, doing a video call, creating a relationship with the customer really helps. And therefore, I feel like that's something that's very, I don't think it's highly explored as a channel. But when you're starting out slow and you don't have enough budgets, I think it's the best way to convert sales.
Lovely. I think what I hear from here is, in fact, that as a young company, that's actually one of your USPs, that the promoter is able to be there in all the first sales.
Mm.
I think when I'm buying and I'm hearing the promoters itself, do their best to convince me to sell, that's a USP, because at your scale or bigger scales of larger companies, that's impossible. Now, Pooja, just hopping to the last part, I think you've been very, very helpful in giving lot of feedback and advice to young companies and first time founders. I'd love for you to give us a parting thought, which is about the toughest thing around your first 1,000 days, which is actually living through the 1,000 days, right? It's so hard to wake up and not see anything work, right? In your initial days, it takes too long for things to actually come into motion. So how do you stay resilient as a founder, if you can share that with us?
So I think, Karan, for me, I had a very clear vision from day one of what I want to do, you know, in terms of my objective setting was very clear that I want to come back to India and I want to build something and I want to create. So I'll tell you, my the context that I came from was that I was in a big investment bank where I was one amongst 30,000 people. And every day of my life, I gave about 12 to 18 hours a day to that company. And I had no understanding of where my value addition was. I had no understanding of what my contribution was and where was it even, who was it benefiting, how much were they benefiting from all the work that I was doing. And that's when it was a very clear sort of objective for me that when I build something of my own, I want to really add value to consumers and build something that really takes a brand from level 0 to a very big level that everybody sort of uh, gives credibility and respect to the product and the brands. I think that vision only drives me. I think the ability to, sort of wake up every day and say that every day my goalposts change, because once you have achieved one benchmark, then suddenly you realize that your benchmark has already moved. Now your mind is already thinking on the other level and saying that, okay, this has been achieved, but actually now you have to achieve. So, we are already at 50 stores. We're already counting 80 stores. I'm not looking at 100, but now I'm looking at a goalpost of achieving 200 stores by 2027. So whilst, maybe 6 months ago, I was only looking at 100 stores in 2026, but suddenly, things have changed and now my goalpost has moved to a 200 stores. I'm sure like within a few months, it'll move to a 500 stores. So I think because the goalposts keep sort of increasing, your objective setting changes, drive your passion for what you're wanting to do and where it is stemming from, I think plays a very big role. So for me, I don't think anything that I've achieved so far, or I don't even believe that, we have done anything great at this point in time, because the objective setting is only different, right? The objective is already that it has to move a certain level and it has to be of a certain benchmark for people to come and say that, yeah, okay, we know of your company, we know of Limelight, we know of what you guys are doing. So I think that passion is what drives me and wakes me every morning to come to Limelight.
Lovely, Pooja. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you had a good time.
I did. Thank you so much, Kamal. It's very interesting speaking with you. Thank you for your time.
No, it's been a pleasure. And for everybody who stuck along, thank you so much for tuning in. If you'd like another founder, please subscribe to our channels. Bye bye. See you.